Hi everyone, welcome to Got Therapy. I'm Michael Baltimore. You probably hear some noise in the background. That's okay. It's perfectly fine. We're just doing a little construction on the building.
They're building
as we
a
record
bunker.
This. We need to. This is Dr. Dan Rose. He's from Columbus State University's Counseling Center, and we're happy to have him each week here on Got Therapy.
We're the Bob and Doug McKenzie of mental health.
Okay, all right, that's good. But that stunned me for just a moment. But I'd have to look up. I have to look those up. I don't know.
Those are the guys. The Canadian guys, comedy team.
Oh yes, that's right. Yeah, the cable TV guys. All right,
Yeah,
that's good. Yeah. All right, well today we're going to talk a little bit about
the new set. Look at that.
Yes, it is the first time we've used this new set. We've got to do some more lighting and work on it, but
that was built exclusively with child labor.
Yeah.
I want people to realize that
that is wrong. That is absolutely
15 toddlers took lock them in a room.
Not true. Not true. However, it could very well have been. But that's a nice thought. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about thinking, our thoughts.
Well, we got two studies that came across this week that I thought were interesting. Two studies.
Okay, go.
And the first study was, actually it was a study of Charlie Sheen. I'm kidding. No, that was Charlie Sheen. That guy really dropped out of the limelight, didn't he?
What happened after the big blow up? We did a show on him one time. You know, when we went kind of off the grid.
Because I always wanted to be Charlie Sheen when I grew up. You know.
Yes.
I said one of these days I will be Charlie Sheen.
Or Emilio Estevez, either one.
All right, there we go. He's the quiet. He's sort of the quiet, reserved member of that family.
Yes. Right? Is there one of those? Excellent. All right. So there are two studies, and you were going to tell us about one.
Well, there are two studies, and neither one of these studies involve Charlie Sheen or Cheese Whiz, because you combine those two together. Yeah.
It's going to take us a while, but we're going to get there. We had one comment not long ago. Get to the point. One guy wrote on the thing. We're getting there, my friend. We are getting there. And it's just taking us time.
Getting there is half the fun.
It's the humor. We've got to get to it. All right, that study.
Okay, but there's nothing about Cheese Whiz. So this is the first study involved where they placed a number of individuals in a room, and they were given the number of possible tasks. They could one group were able to, I think, were asked to sit and simply think.
Okay.
Another were given a task of they had the possibility of listening to some music, and then others were given the task of either doing nothing or giving themselves a mild electric shock.
Doing nothing, so they had the choice. Doing nothing or
a mild electric shock.
Wow,
and the interesting thing is.
Wait, why would anyone choose mild electric
shock? Most people chose in that subgroup mild electric shock. They did not want to be alone by themselves in a room with their own thoughts and feelings.
Oh.
They would much rather interrupt it with a mild electric shock.
It? That sounds very problematic.
There's something important about that.
Yep.
And the other study, which is sort of similar, and
more about that. That's
in no way connected, but involved the effects of what's known as deep reading. Reading works of fiction in which one discusses, thinks about the emotions and the complexities of the characters involved. And this is different than, say, carnal reading, where one is reading for simply erotic content or action content or Charlie Sheen.
Right,
so,
but something that is...
Those are both the same thing.
Right, yes.
Erotic and action, it's Charlie Sheen.
All right, I'm going to let that go. But the notion of sort of a surface level, not really delving in, getting deep into the character
and that would be
plot.
Called carnal reading. And so when I stumbled across both these, I thought to myself, you know what? In some ways, this is interesting because I think many of the things that we do are much like those electric shocks, right? The first thing you do when you come home from work, you turn on maybe some 2.5 Men. You do something.
Get the television going, get some distraction out there in the world that maybe keeps us from having. Yeah, see, we're doing some construction. We're going to keep going. Yeah. So I'm going to ask our engineer to come over and maybe make that switch for us that they did earlier.
Or maybe I could concentrate on making it happen.
All right, we can do it. So we're still recording, but that's okay. So this is the world of technology.
There we go.
In the world of technology.
No,
it's going to take you a while to get that that ability back.
Watch, I can do it. Watch, I can do it.
All right. Okay. All right. You're going to concentrate. You're going to get the lights to come back on. I don't think you have that kind of power.
There you go. See?
Wait.
I can do it.
All right. I knew there was something up. I knew there was something up with that mental ability of yours.
You should
Yes.
see what I can do with Cheese Whiz.
Back to the Cheese Whiz. All right, people come home, they do not want to engage in this sort of their own thought process. They want to avoid it. They'll do anything to distract away from that. Why is that? What's wrong with what a person is kind of thinking in their own way?
I think that
Why are
there
they
is
afraid?
a
I don't know.
potential dysphoria or dysregulation of affect when one is alone with one's thought, right? There's the possibility of thinking about things you don't want to. There's the possibility, and I think that much of our current capitalist society, particularly the entertainment area of that, is a way of making that electric shock a little more pleasant. Things to distract us. They move
It totally
quick.
distracts. You know, this is the week where Michael Bay's movie, another Transformers, the latest.
Transformers like 42. I think it's a 42nd
2 hours and 30,
this time,
40
no,
minutes
the
or
Transformers are actually CPAs.
That is not right. That is not true. But it's just
boring.
constant energy, movement, and motion that just kind of takes us away from our thoughts in a way.
Well, and the Transformers is a wonderful example of it's an object, a cultural object, that could lend itself to that sort of shock. It could lend itself to carnal experience, something that doesn't. Now, the catch is, in some ways, that's not completely Michael Bay's fault, because someone could. I mean, you could, while watching Transformers, you could ask yourself some questions. What sort of culture creates this sort of thing? What are the hidden subtexts, those that were not unintentional? Like, for instance, you'll notice that these are the Transformers transform into these modern American muscle cars.
Right.
There are all sorts of product placements all around. You can begin to ask yourself, you can actually engender a much more deep experience of this film if you, and I use this word a lot, if you are mindful and mentalized, if you lean into that experience, you can cultivate something out of what is potentially nothing.
Right.
And so what both those studies and seem to indicate is that if there's such a thing as deep versus carnal reading of things, and that if a deep reading of things lends itself to a greater understanding of cognitive affective processes, a growing of one's subjectivity, then one could make a practice of exercising those muscles. That as opposed to reaching for the shock, taking a breath, allowing yourself to sort of think and feel. That's what a meditative practice does. That's what, if you work with addictions and compulsions, often the therapeutic indicator in that point is to open up some sort of space between the compulsion and the action. There's a space for thought, something between when you're sitting down and before you hit that shock. If you create some sort of space there, you have the possibility of being able to think and feeling.
Well, it almost sounds like that's what you do in your therapy practice, in the counseling practice, is to be able to have the person sort of slow down and begin to take a look at their thoughts and their behaviors, the feelings, and so forth, at some level of
and as you know,
distance.
I tend to have a psychoanalytic viewpoint of things.
I've
We've
heard
talked about before.
I've actually heard
about
that. Yep.
I have a Freud tattoo. Won't tell you where. I can make it dance. But
really, we had to go there. Yes, I guess we did. All right, keep going.
I won actually a Freud twerking contest.
Please, there's no twerking allowed in this studio. Please, thank you.
Sometimes a cigar is not a cigar.
Okay. All right. See, I don't know how to deal with some of this sometimes, but we're going to come back to this notion of helping people get that view.
My theoretical model, right? So the whole idea of the model is some way goes back all the way to Socrates, the notion of an examined life.
Right.
And it's an examined life not for simple navel gazing. And navel gazing is someone who may be lost in misery, or who may cultivate an existential dread, which becomes in and of itself just another one of those shocks. Just another way of,
just avoiding, really.
And it's another form of carnal. There's something about cultivating misery, and that could generate itself another form of carnal experience. I mean, it's what it is.
Well, it makes me wonder why people want to work so hard or go to the nearest easiest thing to block the thinking process. What's the fear there? If I start to do this self-exam, this notion of examine life, is it fear? Is that why, or is it unknown territory? What causes this?
In my practice, what I often see is that there are a couple of ways. This goes back almost to Freud, and it's certainly in the psychoanalytic end of things, that there are two sort of ways of thinking about this, and they used to call this the tragic man versus guilty man. And that with guilty man, this is sort of the standard Freudian notion that we are in some ways at war with our impulses, that we are conflicted, so that we don't go there because it generates conflict. It generates a tension, an anxiety, a dysphoric feeling, and so therefore we avoid it. Because if we begin to sit down and think, we begin to think about the things we haven't done, the things we have done. We are visited by all the things that we've been repressing or pushing out of our mind.
All that anxiety that we are dealing with, and that was Freud's notion, is that we defend against that. Yes.
Freud was, we shoot ourselves in the foot. Society, time and time again, individuals and groups, because of their own guilt, their own inability to own past actions, they literally recreate the very things they're running from. The action of the repetition compulsion. So Freud would say that we repeat over and over again because we are unable to own, to turn our shame into guilt, to be able to own our experiences, to put them into words instead of acting them out. That's what Freud would say.
So this is kind of a natural reaction to go for that shock. In that study you originally talked about, the person did not want to be alone with their own thoughts, and so they would administer themselves a mild shock just to avoid that self-examination.
That's an example. Of Freud, that's guilty man. I may have gotten, but that's guilty man. That's the conflict.
Okay.
I tend to focus, more contemporary models are much more focused on this notion of tragic man. So it's not that we may have the conflict, but quite often, particularly when we deal with people who have personality disorders and whatnot, it's a matter of what they didn't get. So there's something missing. They haven't built the executive functioning, the mental muscles to be able to move through those spaces, and as a result, they reflexively avoid them. So what often in therapy does, with the guilty man, you get people to begin to put into words their conflicts, begin to own the things that they've done in an effort to be able to not repeat them. When you have this notion of tragic man, you have to literally build up the skills because they've been missing. Oftentimes their familial circumstances didn't allow them to have the sort of caretakers and whatnot that could help them to build those
and so it's a developmental process that goes over time. You have to build that mental muscle that you said, and I think you talked to, and you used the word earlier, but mindfulness, this ability to reflect, this really taking time out. Is that how we build mental muscle? Or is this a long-term developmental process that we may not be able to change that quickly?
I would go back to, and this is what I might challenge everybody out there to think about this. If you want to cultivate a deeper reading of your life, a deeper reading of the people around you, your relationships, a deeper reading of your spiritual life, of your aesthetic life, the movies, the books, the things that you have, the first step is to maybe identify what your shocker is. What buttons do you push to shock yourself out of the possibility of having those experiences? So literally to be able to think about yourself, what are the rhythms of a typical day? What are the things that you do that may be keeping you from being able to engage yourself in the world in such a way as that you may grow?
Yeah, the drinking, the drugs, all of the things that get us into trouble out there sometimes. But even the day-to-day activities of avoiding things and finding things that distract us from our that moment where we can have the introspection and kind of look into ourselves and what happens. It's very interesting. So the person really needs to examine their day-to-day activities, where you spend your time, what you do with your time, especially alone time, that kind of thing. All right, very interesting.
Alone time, that'd be wonderful. I think also to try to cultivate that space when you're in the presence of the other, to be able to ask yourself, what am I feeling in the presence of this person? How does this feeling relate to feelings I've had with other people? May this feeling in some way be connected specifically with my current interaction with this other person? You can begin to think of the subtleties and textures of your experiences. And you can go back again to something like the Transformers 42 version of this would be interacting with somebody at a party where you're simply talking about the weather, or you're in line to get your Starbucks Frappuccino, and each of those, even though those moments are in some ways superficial, they could invite, if you want them, if you want to, a deeper reading. And so what I might suggest is, and it's not something you always have to do, but to practice, to ask yourself, what are the buzzers that you push to move you out of that space? And then you could literally begin to lean into the things that you're really using to avoid. You can literally lean into those moments, and you can ask yourself, what is this thing that I'm using? What am I feeling? What might I be avoiding to feel? All those sorts of things. And that's kind of what happens in a therapy situation, particularly when you do a lot of process work. Right.
So, yeah, the therapist is really going to help you go in those directions and really examine your behaviors and thoughts and feelings and so forth. Well, that's a very interesting notion. And so it gets back to mindfulness again, if I'm not...
we use that word gets used a lot.
Maybe too much, but a little bit. But are we saying that most people don't? That we're just kind of, we have our agenda, we have our schedule day to day, we got a work schedule, we got a family schedule, we got all these things, and we don't slow down to really examine those deeper meanings.
Even the Dalai Lama or Sting, who I think are the same people. I don't know if you know this.
Okay, no,
if you've ever heard the Dalai Lama sing Roxanne,
I've never seen those.
That guy can hit some high notes.
Those two guys in the same sentence. Back the first time probably ever. But go ahead.
Even people who are adept at mentalization.
Right.
Anytime you have a affectively charged event, your capacity for self-reflection dissolves. No matter how calm, no matter, there are going to be moments when you lose that. So it's important to remember that it's impossible to maintain consistent mindfulness. Probably would be detrimental. Your capacity to be lost and found and lost and found.
Right.
Those are the rhythms, those are the pulsations that one has to have as one moves throughout the day. I think what we're asking is the capacity to open up just a little more of the possibility of leaning into your life in a way that you might normally not. To be able to ask yourself. I mean, there was a recent study showing that a lot of folks who end up cheating on their spouses, that we have this cultural narrative that it's because, like with Chevy Chase in the movie Vacation, a supermodel drives by in a Ferrari and suddenly he wants to cheat. Well, actually, what has happened is all the things that led up to that moment of his disconnection from himself, from his family, and from his wife, all those things engender the possibility of pushing another one of those buzzers. And an affair often is that very thing. It's a way of shocking yourself out of and away from something that if you were able to lean into, become mindful of, you might be able to make a whole different set of choices. So there are often the things that we do that appear self-destructive are actually, and I think we can all agree that to a degree an affair is one of those things.
Sure.
If you practice a little more of your capacity for some deep understanding of the world around you, including your emotional life, your life with your wife and your spouse and your family, you might not have to make those sorts of choices.
I like it. And we were talking earlier about how people distract themselves from that leaning in, as you said. But there are defense mechanisms out there, and that's a Freudian development, that with these ideas, these mechanisms to avoid the anxiety or push the anxiety down or push it away. So there's times when we need to do those. It's not.
They are reflexive. They are necessary. They are also that one can build better defenses. For instance, the two major defenses that in some way are reflected in this are the repression versus suppression. And with repression, it's almost reflexive. One chooses a shock without even giving yourself a chance to have a choice. Right. And repression is the most dangerous. If we go back to our example with Chevy Chase and the vacation thing.
Right.
If you begin to repress your own loneliness, your own conflict, your own anger, and your own frustration toward your spouse and your family, all these are natural moments. Families are stressful. If you repress that, then you generate the possibility of reflexive acting out. Acting out in accordance with something that you haven't even given a name for yet, so you don't control it. So you could really do some dumb stuff. With suppression, however, you allow yourself to feel it and to name it, and then say, okay, but right now I can't deal with this. Very different things. And all higher order defenses involve some level of suppression. Like one of the highest order defenses one could possibly have is, say, humor or intellectualization. Those are the sort of the top two. Mm-hmm. And in both of those, it requires some acknowledgement of the thing that you're making fun of or you're joking about. Mm-hmm. So it's not an active repression. In intellectualization, it involves you to have to be able to name the very thing that you were dissecting cognitively. Mm-hmm. And those tend to be higher order because you're less likely to act reflexively and act out if you are in using these sorts of models. They have their cost. I mean, both those can generate their own difficulties, but it's a different set, and it can be less detrimental than those that operate under repression.
Right. Okay. Well, that makes sense. I'm glad you helped us understand that. Higher order defenses. I think you just made all of that up. But no, that's where it is. But we really, since we've been on a theme for a while on this show of this notion of becoming more mindful and kind of taking the time to examine our thoughts and understand things, as opposed to in our society we're always rushing through getting to the next thing and blocking and using these distractions to kind of keep us away from that mindfulness and that thought process that might help us understand ourselves a little better. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we've kind of covered that topic.
We beat that horse.
That horse is now out in the pasture. Ladies and gentlemen, no, I wasn't going there. I wasn't gonna go there. But you've been listening to GotTherapy.
We waxed that weaseler. So what else can you say that you could do? I don't know, something. We'll come up with our own saying.
Well, yeah, that's right. We leave it to you, the audience, to do that.
Actually, I wanted to at one point in one of these things to storm off the set. You know?
Yeah, we're gonna have that. We're gonna have a guest in. I've had it. I'm moving out.
I want to storm out the set.
I'm trying to do that with every show that we produce around here, but it'll happen sooner or later here. It may be that the audience storms in one day during this show. That may be the opposite effect. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm trying to get. Well, yes.
I'll say these words.
All right.
You call that a mango, and then I'm gone. How about that?
I think we'll just have to contemplate what that means.
You call that a mango, and then I'm gone.
I need more context. I need to understand that a little bit more. But that's my issue. All right. GotTherapy, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Dan Rose. I'm Michael Baltimore. We'll see you next time right here at Columbus State Television. Tune in each week. We'll see you.